Hello, it's me, Mike, with HPDS. This video will be a reading and a study of Leviticus chapter 13. And before I get started, I'll go ahead and pray. And I'll pray by reading the Lord's Prayer out of the book of Matthew chapter 6, as I normally do. And it reads, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Okay, so we are at Leviticus chapter 13, and if you remember a quick overview, moving forward from the book of Exodus, of course, and of course the book of Genesis, the children of Israel are now in the wilderness after being taken out of Egypt in the book of Exodus, of course, and they made it to Mount Sinai. God told them how to make this tabernacle. And then at the beginning of Leviticus, he started explaining how to make the sacrifices and the offerings. So if you remember, the first few chapters of Leviticus, chapters 1 through 7, were about the different types of offerings, the meat offerings, the peace offerings, sin offerings, trespass offerings, and so forth. And then that was the first 7 chapters of Leviticus. Moving past that, from chapters 8 through 10, 8, 9, and 10 were about Aaron's sons and how they were consecrated. And of course, in chapter 10, we had the unfortunate event of Nadab and Abihu dying from offering, strange fire before the Lord. So that was the Aaron and his sons. And moving on from there, the past couple of chapters, 11 and 12, have been kind of about cleanliness. They've been about cleanliness on how to remain clean. And then this chapter, Leviticus 13, is kind of going on that same. We're still in that same section regarding cleanliness. And in this chapter, we will be talking about it's called leprosy. It's a historically known disease known leprosy, and that's what this chapter will be going about. Leviticus 13 is called the guidance for the priests in discerning leprosy. And what we're looking for in this chapter, it's a decent sized chapter of 59 verses. Verses 1 through 8, we're going to read about the signs of leprosy. 9 through 17, we're going to read about the plague of leprosy. 18 through 23, we're going to read about boils. 24 through 28, we're going to read about a hot burning. 29 through 37, a plague on the head or the beard. Verses 38 through 46, a bright spot. And verses 47 through 59, we're going to read about how to treat the garments. So leprosy, that's obviously this is one of the first diseases that we're going to be reading about in the Bible. There may have been some other ones, the plagues that came out in Egypt, but he's going to spend this whole chapter talking about leprosy and how to discern it and how the priest should go about it. So what I'll go ahead and do, as these videos usually go, I'll read the chapter straight through, and then I'll go back and I'll reread it line by line, and kind of explain it further by seeing what the Holy Spirit has to say about it. So, I'll go ahead and get started on that right now, and we will be reading Leviticus chapter 13. And it reads, And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, When a man shall have in the skin of his flesh a rising, a scab, or bright spot, and it be in the skin of his flesh like the plague of leprosy, then he shall be brought unto Aaron the priest, or unto one of his sons the priests. And the priest shall look on the plague in the skin of the flesh, and when the hair in the plague is turned white, and the plague in sight be deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a plague of leprosy. And the priest shall look on him and pronounce him unclean. If the bright spot be white in the skin of his flesh, and in sight be not deeper than the skin, and the hair thereof be not turned white, then the priest shall shut him that hath the plague 7 days. And the priest shall look on him the 7th day, and behold, if the plague in his sight be at a stay, and the plague spread not in the skin, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days more. And the priest shall look on him again the 7th day, and behold, if the plague be somewhat dark, and the plague spread not in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is but a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spread much abroad in the skin, after that he hath been seen of the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen of the priest again. And if the priest see that, behold, the scab spreadeth in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprosy. When the plague of leprosy is in a man, then he shall be brought unto the priest. And the priest shall see him, and behold, if the rising be white in the skin, and it have turned the hair white, and there be quick raw flesh in the rising, it is an old leprosy in the skin of his flesh. And the priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall not shut him up, for he is unclean. And if a leprosy break out abroad in the skin, and the leprosy cover all the skin of him that hath the plague, from his head even to his foot, wheresoever the priest looketh, then the priest shall consider, and behold, if the leprosy have covered all his flesh, he shall pronounce him clean that hath the plague. It is all turned white, he is clean. But when raw flesh appeareth in him, he shall be unclean. And the priest shall see the raw flesh, and pronounce him to be unclean. For the raw flesh is unclean, it is a leprosy. Or if the raw flesh turn again and be changed unto white, he shall come unto the priest. And the priest shall see him, and behold, if the plague be turned into white, then the priest shall pronounce him clean that hath the plague. He is clean. The flesh also, in which even the skin thereof was a boil, and is healed. And in the place of the boil there be a white rising, or a bright spot, white and somewhat reddish, and it be showed to the priest. And if when the priest seeth, behold, it be in the sight lower than the skin, and the hair thereof be turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy broken out in the boil. But if the priest look on it, and behold, there be no white hairs therein, and if it be not lower than the skin, but be somewhat dark, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days. And if it spread much abroad in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. But if the bright spot stay in his place and spread not, it is a burning boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if there be any flesh in the skin whereof there is a hot burning, and the quick flesh that burneth have a white bright spot, somewhat reddish or white, then the priest shall look upon it, and behold, if the hair in the bright spot be turned white, and it be in sight deeper than the skin, it is a leprosy broken out of the burning. Wherefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of leprosy. But if the priest look on it, and behold, there be no white hair in the bright spot, and it be no lower than the other skin, but be somewhat dark, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days. And the priest shall look upon him the 7th day, and if it be spread much abroad in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. It is the plague of leprosy. And if the bright spot stay in his place and spread not in the skin, but be somewhat dark, it is a rising of the burning, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is an inflammation of the burning. If a man or woman have a plague upon the head or the beard, then the priest shall see the plague, and behold, if it be in sight deeper than the skin, and there be in it a yellow thin hair, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a dry scald, even a leprosy upon the head or beard. And if the priest look on the plague of the skull, and behold, it be not in sight deeper than the skin, and that there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall shut up him that hath the plague of the skull 7 days. And in the 7th day the priest shall look on the plague, and behold, if the skull spread not, and there be in it no yellow hair, and the skull be not in sight deeper than the skin, he shall be shaven, but the scale shall he not shave. And the priest shall shut up him that hath the scale 7 days more. And in the 7th day the priest shall look on the skull, and behold, if the skull be not spread in the skin, nor be in sight deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the skull spread much in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall look on him, and behold, if the skull be spread in the skin, the priest shall not seek for yellow hair, he is unclean. But if the skull be in his sight at a stay, and that there is black hair grown up therein, the skull is healed, he is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. If a man also or a woman have in the skin of their flesh bright spots, even white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and behold, if the bright spots in the skin of their flesh be darkish white, it is a freckled spot that groweth in the skin, he is clean. And the man whose hair is fallen off his head, he is bald, yet is he clean. And he that hath his hair fallen off from the part of his head toward his face, he is forehead bald, yet is he clean. And if there be in the bald head or bald forehead a white reddish sore, it is a leprosy sprung up in his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall look upon it, and behold, if the rising of the sore be white reddish in his bald head, or in his bald forehead, as the leprosy appeareth in the skin of the flesh, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him utterly unclean, his plague is in his head. And the leper in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be rent, and his head bare. And he shall put a covering upon his upper lip, and shall cry, Unclean, unclean. All the days wherein the plague shall be in him he shall be defiled. He is unclean. He shall dwell alone, without the camp shall his habitation be. The garment also that the plague of leprosy is in, whether it be woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it be in the warp or woof of linen or of woolen, whether in a skin or in anything made of skin. And if the plague be greenish or reddish in the garment or in the skin, either in the wrap or in the woof or in anything of skin, it is a plague of leprosy, and shall be shown unto the priest. And the priest shall look upon the plague, and shut it up that hath the plague 7 days. And he shall look on the plague on the 7th day. If the plague be spread in the garment, either in the wrap or in the woof or in a skin, or in any work that is made of skin, the plague is a fretting leprosy, it is unclean. He shall therefore burn the garment, whether warp or woof, in woolen or in linen, or anything of skin wherein the plague is, for it is a fretting leprosy. It shall be burnt in the fire. And if the priest shall look, and behold, the plague be not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything of skin, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing wherein the plague is, and he shall shut it up 7 days more. And the priest shall look on the plague after that it is washed, and behold, if the plague have not changed his color, and the plague be not spread, it is unclean. Thou shalt burn it in the fire. It is fret inward, whether it be bare within or without. And if the priest look, and behold, the plague be somewhat dark after the washing of it, then he shall rend it out of the garment, or out of the skin, or out of the warp, or out of the woof. And if it appears still in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything of skin, it is a spreading plague. Thou shalt burn that wherein the plague is with fire. And the garment, either warp or woof, or whatsoever thing of skin it be, which thou shalt wash, if the plague be departed from them, then it shall be washed the second time, and shall be clean. This is the law of the plague of leprosy in a garment of woolen or linen, either in the warp or woof, or anything of skins, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Okay, so yeah, that's a pretty long chapter, I'd say, compared to what we've been reading in Leviticus, and it is about leprosy. And so what we'll go ahead and do is I'll go ahead and reread it line by line, and I do have quite quite a few pictures. I just did a Google search. Obviously, just did a Google search of leprosy, and there's a lot of pictures, and a lot of people, people still have it to this day, and it is a disease that is based off of what the God is talking about. It's based off of cleanliness. You're either clean or you're unclean. And remember, we did read about it, a quick dose of leprosy back in, I want to say it was Exodus 4. Yeah, when the Lord gave Moses his signs, remember, he comes, let me see, I want to say it was maybe Exodus 4. Let me see. I think it was in Exodus 4. I'm trying to find it here. Yep, it's part of the signs that he did it. Yeah, one of them was the serpent on the ground, and then he put forth thine hand, and remember, he put his hand in his shirt and he pulled it out, and it was leprous as snow. Remember, leprous as snow. But that was back in Exodus 4. But yeah, let me go ahead and reread it line by line, going in depth into it, explaining a little bit further, and I'll even show some of these pictures. So real quick, before I do, one more time, here's this outline, what we're looking for. We're looking for the signs of leprosy, the plague of leprosy. We read about boils, hot burning. Then we read about the plagues on the head or the beard. We read about the bright spots, and then we read about the treatment of garments. So let's go ahead and reread it and see what's going on, and what I can't, what kind of pictures I can bring in. Forgive me for that. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man shall have in the skin of his flesh a rising, a scab, or bright spot, and it be in the skin of his flesh like the plague of leprosy, then he shall be brought unto Aaron the priest, or unto one of his sons the priest. So now if you have problems in your skin, you're supposed to go to the priest, and the priest will look at you. So now not only are the priests acting like the judges and like acting like the court system. Remember, I've been talking about this has been like their court system. If you've done something wrong, you go to the priest. The priest do your offerings for you, and then you're made clean again. You're made, your sin goes away. But now they're also acting as some sort of a doctor. You got something on your skin, scab, or obviously these things. Then you go to the priest. Nowadays you'd probably go to a doctor, but back in these days you went to the priest. And the priest shall look on the plague of the skin in the flesh, and when the hair in the plague is turned white, and the plague in sight be deeper than the skin of his flesh, it is a plague of leprosy. And the priest shall look on him and pronounce him unclean. So here are some specific signs that they looked for. So remember, if the hair is turned white, and the plague is deeper than the skin, so that means that you could obviously tell it's going past the skin, and whatever it is going deep into the flesh, into the meat of your body, then obviously they know that it is leprosy, and the priest pronounces him unclean. So remember, that's like what I was saying back in Exodus chapter 4. Let me read some of this Exodus chapter 4 about these signs. Let's see, 1 through 9, that's when he gives them the signs to Moses. So it's one of the later signs. Let me see. Right here, verse 6 of Exodus 4. The Lord said furthermore, put now thine hand into thy bosom. And he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. And he said, put thine hand into thy bosom again. And he put his hand into his bosom again, and plucked it out of his bosom, and behold, it was turned again as his other flesh. So that was verses 6 and 7 of Exodus chapter 4. So it was white then. And remember, Moses put it in his little coat pocket or whatever, his bosom as they call it. And when he pulled it out, white as snow. And then he put it back in, pulled it back out, and it was normal again. So remember, God is saying, look, he's giving him signs that are obviously what we would know as unnatural, supernatural. We would call them supernatural. But here, it's not supernatural. People are just getting this leprosy if they are unclean. Obviously, if they're unclean or they get leprosy, they're unclean. So God is saying you're unclean. So he was telling Moses something about his leprosy, how his hand was unclean. Now he's telling these people what to do about if they become unclean. So that's one way of noticing. Here's more. If the bright spot be white in the skin of his flesh and in the sight be not deeper than the skin. So if you got the bright spot is white, but it's not deeper than the skin, and the hair thereof be not turned white, meaning the hair hasn't turned white, then the priest shall shut up him that hath the plague 7 days. So they're going to quarantine you. That's like quarantine. So now all of a sudden you got a white spot on your skin, but it's not really that deep, and your hair hasn't turned white. Then you're going to get quarantined. You're going to be shut up 7 days. So you're going to be quarantined for 7 days. And then the priest shall look on him the 7th day, and behold, if the plague in his sight be at a stay, and the plague spread not in the skin, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days more. So now you get looked at. So after the 7-day quarantine, you get looked at by the priest, and the plague be stayed, meaning it hasn't really changed. The plague hasn't spread in the skin. But you're still going to get quarantined for 7 more days. So 14 days now you've been quarantined. And the priest shall look on him again on the 7th day, and behold, if the plague be somewhat dark, and the plague spread not in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is but a scab. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. So now, so it's saying it's a scab. It turns dark, and the plague hasn't spread. So kind of, if you know what a scab looks like, if you ever cut yourself and it started bleeding, then afterwards, it kind of healed up and it got that dark skin over it. That's a scab. So that's what he's saying right here. Apparently, in your skin, you could get some sort of white spot that appears to be leprosy, but it ends up being just a scab. It scabs over. So God is telling them, if that's the way it is, he shall pronounce him clean. It is but a scab. But you got to wash his clothes. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. So it's about cleanliness, and that makes sense. If you've got somebody, we know nowadays leprosy. Let me go ahead and show you. And this is from the the World Health Organization. So this is what this is what is considered authoritative. It's not anything that I'm coming up with. This is the World Health Organization, and they call it Hansen's disease, and they call it a chronic infectious disease caused by Mycobacterium leprae. So it's some sort of bacteria. And they believe that it is transmitted via droplets from the nose and mouth during close and frequent contact with untreated cases. That's what they believe. That's what the World Health Organization, what common scientists, what people like to call themselves scientists. This is what they believe. This is what they say. So if you're in close proximity to somebody, that's how you get leprosy. But nonetheless, washing your clothes is something that would obviously probably be recommended in today's world. If there's the concept, if there's leprosy around, it's probably because of some sort of bacteria, and you should probably be washing your clothes, because if you get drops of fluid from that person onto these clothes, someone else can get leprosy. Is what the World Health Organization says. But if the scab spread much abroad in the skin, after that he hath been seen of the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen of the priest again. So now you could get over your leprosy scare. You think you got a scab, but then the scab starts spreading more in the skin, which, if you know anything about a scab, scabs don't spread. If you got a cut and it bleeds, and then you let it rest after a while, it starts to scab over. That scab doesn't spread. But here, with leprosy, this scab could potentially, so you could have a scare. The priest could think it was a scab, but then later on the scab starts to spread. After he had been seen of the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen of the priest again. So if you've been cleared of it, but your scab starts growing, guess what? You got to go back to the priest. And if the priest sees that, behold, the scab spreadeth in his skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprosy. So this is also a leprosy. And that is signs, that's verses 1 through 8. Remember, that was the signs of the leprosy. So this is the first 8 verses, signs of leprosy. So those are your real big signs. So either it's all white, or this white scab, or this white spot scabs over, and then the scab begins to spread. Those are both leprosies. And so now, moving on, verses 9 through 17, we're going to read about the plague of leprosy. So I'm going to go ahead and show some pictures real quick. So these pictures, and I probably put a screen over it just a little while. They are pretty, disturbing is what they say, not for faint of heart, put the kids away or whatever. But these are some, these pictures are pretty, they're realistic. They are pictures of real leprosy, and they are kind of disturbing. So I'll go ahead and make that mention right now. But here are some of these pictures. If you just do a quick leprosy search on Google, these are kinds of pictures you get. So this is leprosy. So you see in this picture right here, you could see how there's these white spots in this person's skin, all these white spots. I believe you could see them in probably this person too. There's just some white spots over here, some white spots into the skin. Let's see, I'm not sure if these are all leprosy or not, but here's another leprous picture. White spots, you got these weird white spots. Here's another one, white spots, and of course it can get pretty bad. Here's some more, if you see this picture, how it goes into the skin. It goes more than just the skin, it goes into the flesh. And you could see that people start losing their body becomes disfigured. You see disfiguring skin sores, lumps and bumps, and people start losing. Look at this one right here, into their flesh. It goes right into the flesh. And you notice how this one has become like the scab. This looks like that dark one. It was probably a white flesh. And then, if the priest would have seen this, shut him up for 7 days, maybe seen that, it was just white. It looks like it's fine. But then it would have scabbed over, but then the scab would have started spreading. And you could see how it's kind of like scabbed over. And then, of course, it's a leprosy. So you get these white spots, or the white spots kind of scab over like this, and then the scab starts spreading. Those are leprosies. So, see, this is more like a leprosy again. And you can see, look at these hands. People, they get disfigured. People start losing their body parts, even the face. It happens to the face, to the nose. I want to say, here's some pictures. Where's the pictures that I saw of the nose? Well, I'm not seeing them right off the bat, but that's some pictures. Oh, here's from the Merck manual. This is a Merck manual, so you can see how the fingers or both of the hands get lost. Wow, that's pretty disturbing. And then this person, the face right here, the leprosy has caused the cartilage in the nose to disintegrate. So, but you could see again, in this picture right here too, like the scabbing. They would have started scabbing, which would have been like a dark. So the white would have started scabbing, and the scabbing would have started, it would have started progressing. So it would have started spreading. And of course, we know normal scabs from a cut do not spread. They just cover the cut, and that's it. But of course, those are some signs of leprosy. Those are some pictures. Leprosy is a very ugly looking disease. It's based off of, we know it obviously, it's some sort of bacteria. People in the World Health Organization, they'll tell you it's bacteria. So that has something to do with cleanliness. God is saying it's cleanliness. It has to do with being clean or unclean. And if you are leprous, you are unclean. There's something unclean about you. That means you've been touching dead animals, remember? Or you've been doing these things from some of these. And we'll actually, I think there's some more. The next few chapters are going to tell you more about being unclean. Remember Leviticus 11, we talked about cleanness. You had you could, if you were eating these unclean meats. So remember, if you were eating pigs in those days, pigs were considered unclean animals. So you could have been eating something that gave you leprosy. You could have been touching any of these unclean animals. If you touched their dead bodies, you were unclean. You were unclean. So God was saying, if you became unclean, perhaps if you became unclean too much, or for whatever reasons, or you could get leprosy. You could get leprosy from uncleanliness. And even into them, uncleanliness was even eating the wrong animals, which of course, we all know today how diseases spread through contact or through the air or some sort of like in this case, bacteria, some sort of bacteria more than likely. And this bacteria obviously can grow on all kinds of things. Bacteria grow on all sorts of things, on all types of surfaces. And I imagine dead bodies of these animals is one of them that bacteria could potentially grow on. So, of course, that's just me, making speculation of some sort. But that is what this is indicating. You get unclean, you could get leprosy. Leprosy is clearly bad enough that God had to talk about it, had to tell you how to treat it, how to tell these people how to treat it. So verses 9 through 17, this is the plague of leprosy. This is what had to be done. So when the plague of leprosy is in a man, then he shall be brought in unto the priest, and the priest shall see him, and behold, if the rising be white in the skin, and it have turned the hair white, and there be quick raw flesh in the rising. So now somebody's got leprosy. So look, they're going to be having white in the skin, and have the hair turn white, and there be a quick raw flesh in the rising. So you could see how this flesh is turning just like that. Look at that. It's raw flesh. I'm not seeing any white hairs on these people in these particular pictures. But, oh wow, look at this one. It's pretty bad. Actually, I think in this picture, I feel like maybe there's some little hairs coming out right here. Maybe those are just I'm not sure what that is, but, let's see. This guy clearly seems to have some sort of, but his hair, it could have just been due to age. I'm not really sure. How about this picture? Well, I'm not seeing. Well, what about this picture? Maybe, but this is saying that you could tell by finding white hair. It would have whatever if you were to get it on your skin right here, the hair that would be there would perhaps turn white. It is an old leprosy. Okay, it would be an old leprosy in the skin of his flesh, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall not shut him up, for he is unclean. So, if you got the leprosy, they know you've got leprosy. But if the skin has turned white, if the hair is turned white, it seems to be that's the older. It's kind of old. He's had this leprosy for a while. Still unclean, but you're not getting quarantined. You're just unclean. You're being declared unclean. And if a leprosy break out abroad in the skin, and the leprosy cover all the skin of him that hath the plague, from his head even to his foot, wheresoever the priest looketh, the priest shall consider, and behold, if the leprosy have covered all his flesh, he shall pronounce him clean that hath the plague. It has all turned white. He is clean. So this is interesting. So if you've had it for a while, you're still unclean, but you're not getting quarantined. Like you get quarantined when it's brand new, but when it's older, not so much. You're still unclean, but you're not getting quarantined. But if it's all over your body, from your head to your toe, your head to your foot, then the priest it's covered all his flesh. You're now all of a sudden you're being pronounced clean. For him that hath the plague, it is all turned white. He is clean. So this is interesting, considering I talked about Moses in Exodus 4. Because in Moses, remember when he got that plague, it was as white as snow. So now he's being told here that if it's completely white, I mean, you've basically been cleaned. You've got leprosy all over your body. You're no longer unclean. You are clean. But when raw flesh appeareth in him, he shall be unclean. So apparently, if you're all over, you've got the leprosy, but you don't. It doesn't have the raw flesh. So that would be. Let's go back to some of these pictures. Some of these pictures do look like that would probably be more. Like this would be raw flesh, so that would be unclean. This would be raw flesh, unclean. You can see some of these pictures, unclean, raw flesh. Oh my goodness, raw flesh. That is very disturbing. I'm gonna go ahead and. But there's got to be a couple here that are maybe like this one right here. No raw flesh would have had the leprosy, perhaps if he has it all over his body, and maybe it's turned to white. It's all turned white, perhaps like this one maybe. Some of these pictures, it's turned all, he's turned white. See how he's mostly turned more white. But he doesn't have any cuts in him. He doesn't have any raw flesh that you could see. So even like this woman's hand right here, it looks like it's turned all white. And if they would have had it all over their body, and it's no longer really bleeding, it's no longer cut, it's just white, then they would be considered clean. But as soon as they started getting the cuts or the raw flesh opening up, so if they started opening up again, that's when they were unclean. So again, this has to do with things that we know about diseases. That diseases are, oftentimes you can contact a disease through, blood, through the fluids. But once it's gotten all, it looks like, if it's gotten all over the body and they're not, it's just this whiteness. You see how it's kind of like this? And it's not oozing, it's not cut, it's not open sores, then they would be considered clean. But as soon as they started bleeding, or as soon as the raw flesh came out, unclean. But when raw flesh appeareth in him, he shall be unclean. And the priest shall see the raw flesh and pronounce him to be unclean. For the raw flesh is unclean. It is a leprosy. So see, that's just what he's saying. The raw flesh is what makes him unclean. Or if the raw flesh turn again and be changed unto white, he shall come unto the priest. And the priest shall see him, and behold, if the plague be turned into white, then the priest shall pronounce him clean that hath the plague. He is clean, so you can become clean if it turned white. And remember, Moses' skin was white as snow. So God had given him a leprosy, but that leprosy was cleaned. He was cleaned of the leprosy, even though his hands was leopard. So that's an interesting sign that God gave him. Yeah, he gave him a leprosy, but it was a clean leprosy. You get what I'm saying? So isn't that interesting? That's the sign that Moses was given. But moving on, 18 through 23, we're going to read about the boils now. So that's the skin. That's what happens if you get the leprosy. But now you get some boils. Okay, so the flesh also, in which even in the skin thereof was a boil, and is healed. So now you see a boil and is healed. And then if the place there of the boil there be a white rising, or a bright spot, white and somewhat reddish, and be showed to the priest. So we're having another issue here. There's a boil and gets healed, but if that underneath the boil all of a sudden there's a white rising or a bright spot, you got to come show it to the priest. And if when the priest seeth it, behold, it be in sight lower than the skin, so that means it's pretty deep in the skin, and the hair thereof be turned white, and you've got that white hair, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague of leprosy breaking out of the boil. And let's go ahead and that's kind of more of these more kind of disturbing ones here. This would probably be like that. Like, oh, you had a boil maybe, and then all of a sudden that boil starts turning reddish or whitish. That's what these probably look at. That would be, they'd come take a look at it. It's a boil. Look at, you could see, and perhaps even this might be considered what you see as a boil. This would probably be something like that too. There's probably a boil over it, and then all of a sudden, when it started to heal, this is what came out of it. So yeah, these are more signs of leprosy. I'm going to go ahead. These are some disturbing pictures, but let's see. It's a plague of leprosy. But if the priest look on it, and behold, there be no white hairs therein, and if it be not lower than the skin, but be somewhat dark, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days. So here's another quarantine. So of course, if there's no white hairs, and it's not that deep in the skin, but it's kind of dark, then you get shut up. You get quarantined. Excuse me. I just sneezed. And if it spread much abroad in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a plague. But if it keeps spreading, you're unclean. You got the plague. But if the bright spot stay in his place and spread not, it is a burning boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. So you can see it's just a burning boil. That's what it is. If it stays, doesn't spread, it's a burning boil. Or if there be any flesh in the skin whereof there is a hot burning. So we're moving on. 24 through 28 is the hot burning. So that was a boil. So boils is obviously a rising in that skin. So but now we're moving into a hot burning. Or if there be any flesh in the skin whereof there is a hot burning. So if your skin is kind of hot, and the quick flesh that burneth have a white bright spot, somewhat reddish or white. So of course you're getting these spots again, the bright white spot, either kind of reddish or white. If you get these spots and it's kind of burning, then you take it to the priest, and the priest shall look upon it, and behold, if the hair in the bright spot be turned white, so there's the hair turning white again, and it be in sight deeper than the skin, and it's going deep into the flesh, it is a leprosy broken out of the burning. Wherefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of leprosy. So here you are. You got another leprosy right here. But if the priest look on it, and behold, there be no white hair in the bright spot, and it be no lower than the other skin, but it be somewhat dark, then the priest shall shut him up 7 days. So you get quarantined if it looks like it's becoming, if it could potentially be, but it may not be, you get quarantined for 7 days. And then on the 7th day, you get looked at again. And if it be spread much abroad in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is the plague of leprosy. And if the bright spot stay in his place and spread not in the skin, but it be somewhat dark, it is a rising of the burning. And the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is an inflammation of the burning. So you could get it from a boil in your skin, or you could get it in some burning in your skin. And these were signs. So you could get burned, it seems like, in a burn. When you get those boils on your skin from a burn, those could potentially turn into leprosy, or potentially they appear to look like leprosy. Leprosy has this appearance that can be confused with just like a burning or a boil. And if we're looking at these pictures, obviously this does look like it could be a burn. A cut into the skin. It looks like you could, but this is leprosy. I mean, this looks like you could have easily just been like you scraped your foot really bad, like at a high speed on the street or something, or, these pictures, even this looks like this could potentially be a burn, and not necessarily leprosy. So that's what it's kind of pointing out, is that these things that potentially are leprous could look like, burns or cuts or boils, burns or boils. And that's why you have to, like even this looks like it could potentially be like maybe you were in a fire, and this is just some burns. But that's not what this is. This is leprosy. But moving on, 29 through 37, we're going to read about a plague on the head or beard. So, so let's see. So after the burning, so now we go into if a man or woman have a plague on the head or the beard. So on your head or on your face, basically. Then the priest shall see the plague, and behold, if it be in sight deeper than the skin, and there be in it a yellow thin hair, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a dry scald, even a leprosy upon the head or beard. So now it's a yellow hair, a yellow thin hair. So if you've got, the marks on your face, and it's deeper than just the skin, so it's not something that's just going on at the top layers. It's something that's going into the flesh, and there's thin yellow hairs. You got leprosy. And if the priest look on the plague of the skull, and behold, it be not in sight deeper than the skin, and that there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall shut him up. So yeah, you got it looks like it, but it's not too deep in the skin. Then they're gonna do another quarantine, 7 days quarantine. And in the seventh day, the priest shall look on the plague, and behold, if the skull spread not, there be no yellow hair, and it be not deeper than the skin, he shall be shaven, but the skull shall not shave, and the priest shall shut him that hath the skull 7 more. So if you got it, but it doesn't look like it's spreading, there's just a little spot right there where you're going to shave everything else except for that little spot or whatever that appears to be like it could be leprosy. And you're testing for that hair, it seems that you get quarantined again. And in the 7th day, the priest shall look on the skull, and behold, if the skull be not spread in the skin, nor be in sight deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. So, of course, you're clean. If it's not been spreading, there's none of the yellow hairs, it hasn't spread. You're going to wash your clothes, but you're clean. So another quarantine that's based off of it could potentially be, but it's not. But if the skull spread much in the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall look on him, and behold, if the skull be spread in the skin, the priest shall not seek for yellow hair, he is unclean. So even if after that it does begin to spread, and the skull is spreading, you don't need to look for the yellow hair. He's unclean. It's already there. It's obvious. But if the skull be in his sight at a stay, and that there is a black hair grown upon therein, the skull is healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. So you're looking for black hairs compared to the yellow hairs or white hairs on other parts of the body. So you're clean. Now moving on, let's see, 38 through 46, we're going to read about the bright spots. But if a man also or a woman have in the skin of their flesh bright spots, even white bright spots, remember, look at even this. Some, I don't know if that's a real picture of leprosy or of just somebody scratching. That might be, but looks like a picture, somebody in their face. Looking for these white spots right here. This person has the white spots. Even this person, white spots all over their face. And of course, even these ones that we saw earlier. The white spots. White spots. But, so if you have any of these bright spots, then the priest looks at you, and behold, if the bright spots in the skin of their flesh be darkish white, it's a freckled spot that groweth in the skin. He's clean. So we're not talking about freckles here, because we know about freckles. And apparently freckles can look like these spots. I mean, this kind of looks like some people have these, and they're, people call them birthmarks. Sometimes they're just birthmarks. Or freckles, but that's not what this is. You're looking. If it is just a freckle, it's you're clean. That's what he's saying. If it's just a freckle, that's not what we're looking for. But if the man whose hair is fallen off his head, he is bald, yet is he clean. So bald people. So even though you're bald, being bald doesn't mean you've got leprosy. And if there be in the bald head or bald forehead a white reddish sore, it is a leprosy sprung up in his bald head or his bald forehead. So just being bald doesn't mean you're gonna have leprosy, but you could have leprosy on a bald head. Then the priest shall look upon it, and behold, if the rising of the sore be white reddish in his bald head or in his bald forehead, as the leprosy appeareth on the skin of the flesh, he is a leprous man. So you can take a look at it. You can see the white reddish. If it obviously is appearing under the skin or in the skin, then you got leprosy. He is the leprous man. He is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him utterly unclean. His plague is in his head. So you could have leprosy in your head. And the leper in whom the plague is, his clothes shall be rent, meaning you tear them apart. You kind of destroy the clothing. You tear them off. You rent them in half. You rip them apart. and his head bare, and he shall put a covering upon his upper lip, and shall cry, unclean, unclean. So that's interesting. So whoever is leprous, so this is kind of, if anybody is leprous, you got to get rid of their clothing, because remember, it had to be, destroyed. Even if you were cleared of leprosy, you still had to wash your clothing. So the people who do have leprosy, they got to destroy their clothes, and they have to put some sort of a covering on their upper lip. And he's got to cry, unclean, unclean. So that's interesting. His clothing, his head bare, and he shall... that's just what, once you had leprosy, you had to tell everybody you had leprosy. That's what you were doing. You had to roam, and you had to cry, unclean, unclean. All the days wherein the plague shall be in him, he shall be defiled. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. Without the camp shall his habitation be. I mean, he's got to leave camp. He's unclean. So if you had leprosy, you were considered unclean. You had to let everybody know that you were unclean. Then you had to leave the camp. You had to leave and be by yourself, out into the wilderness by yourself, away from camp. So that was leprosy. And then moving on, 47:59, we're going to see about these treatments of these garments. So now you've got leprosy. You got to leave the camp. And that's pretty much, that's the gist of it. And all up until here has been talking about the different signs of leprosy, from the boils, from the burning, so forth. But now we're going to read about the clothing. So after that happened, the garment also that the plague of leprosy is in, whether it be woolen garment or a linen garment. So now these clothes that you just, rent off this person, now you got to check to see if the clothing has leprosy, whether it be in the warp or woof of linen or of woolen, whether in a skin or of anything made of skin. So any kind of clothing. And if the plague, be greenish or reddish in the garment. So if you find like green or reddish in the garment, or in the skin, then it is a plague of leprosy. And so you got to show these clothes to the priest. So the garments can have leprosy inside of them, which is kind of, pretty bad. That I'm not gonna, seems, these pictures could explain how that could be. Obviously if you got flesh like this that's just degenerating, obviously you would probably have pieces of flesh falling off, pieces of skin, just like this. Obviously, if they're saying it's a bacteria, you can also see bacteria begin to grow if it grows big enough or whatever. You can obviously sometimes see that big patches of big. But let's see, if it's closed, and you're going to show it to the priest, and if the priest shall look upon the plague and shut it up that hath the plague 7 days. So even the clothing. And he shall look on the plague on the 7th day. If the plague be spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in a skin, or any work that is made of skin, the plague is a fretting leprosy. It is unclean. So the garments, this bacteria that we're calling it, this bacteria, Hansen's disease, it can get into garments, and it can even spread in clothing. And if that's the case, they wanted to take a look at it. If the plague is a fretting leprosy, and then that's when we move in. He shall therefore burn that garment, whether warp or woof, in woolen or in linen, or in anything of skin where the plague is, for it is a fretting leprosy. It shall be burnt in the fire. So you burn that clothing. So even the clothing can have this leprosy bacteria kind of spreading throughout the garment. And that is a fretting leprosy. That's unclean. That's dangerous. Burn it. And if the priest shall look, and behold, the plague be not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything in the skin, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing wherein the plague is, and shall shut it up 7. So if there's no plague, you still quarantine it. You still get it. You still quarantine the garments, and the priest shall look on the plague. After that it is washed, so you wash it. And behold, if the plague have not changed its color, or the plague be not spread, it is unclean. thou shalt burn it in the fire. It is fret inward, whether it be bare within or without. So if you washed it and the clothing hasn't changed the color, but it also doesn't spread, it's still unclean. So it should go away. If you wash it, this little marking should go away, but it hasn't. It's still the plague. It is fret inward, whether it be bare, and so you still got to burn it in the fire. And if the priest look and behold the plague be somewhat dark after the washing of it, then he shall rend it out of the garment, or out of the skin, or out of the warp, or out of the woof. And if it appears still in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in anything of skin, it is a spreading plague. Thou shalt burn that. So you're really kind of trying to find out. It's like they could find out there was fretting. There's a fret inward. It could also still start to turn dark, and you could cut it off of the garment. But then all of a sudden, even if you cut it out, it could still spread, and that's also dangerous. Also burning with fire. And the garment, either warp or woof, or whatsoever thing of skin it be, which thou shalt wash, if the plague be departed from them, then it shall be washed the second time, and shall be clean. So you could get these garments, and you're really testing the garments you can kind of test to see what kind of a plague it is. Like obviously, like the fretting plague, for example, that's where you know, when it was in there and it would just get worse. That's when you burn it. You know, you could see that it was, but then you also see these other kinds that didn't look like anything happens to it, but you cut it out and it still starts spreading throughout the clothing. This could be a spreading one also. Either way, those will burn. But if none of that happened, you could still, if there was no plague in the garment after all, and you cleaned it, then it's clean and you can use it again, which was kind of important. You know, I'm sure in these in the days before mass-produced clothing, nowadays clothing is everywhere. It's so everywhere, we're sending it to even the poorest nations in the world have plenty of clothings. Not back in these days. They had to make their own, obviously, and they would probably want to try to use whatever they can. Or even if you had leprosy, you probably still wanted clothing, and they would have probably wanted to make sure that the clothing of the lepers stayed clean themselves, I would imagine. This is the law of the plague of leprosy in a garment or woolen or linen, either in the warp or woof, or anything of skins, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. But so that is finally, that's the end of chapter Leviticus 13. It was a pretty long chapter, obviously. It has to do with leprosy, and there's a lot to talk about leprosy, and I showed all those pictures. Leprosy is not pretty. It does not look like it's a nice disease to have, and it's so dangerous that you have to be sent outside of camp. It can spread, and God is saying it has to do with uncleanliness. You could become unclean, and obviously that's where somehow this leprosy was coming into play. From being unclean, you became unclean, and so forth. So, and remember too, you could get leprosy that was still clean, or it had become clean. So you could have leprosy long enough that it went through your whole body and it turned to white, and you were clean somehow. You know, you weren't spreading it around. But if you had sores that started to opening, then you were unclean. So, and I remember pointing out, Moses was given this leprosy in his arm. It was all white as snow, so it was leprosy, but it was a clean leprosy, which is interesting. But that was leprosy. It's in the section regarding cleanliness. We'll read some more about cleanliness over the next couple of chapters to see a little bit more depth about cleanliness. But I'll go ahead and end this video here, and I'll go ahead and say, as I normally do, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for future chapter by chapter Bible study. And I pray that we all bless Jesus Christ, and may Jesus Christ bless all of us. Amen.